session where we're going to be answering all your questions about the two videos that are posted up on our website at gilbertaz.gov/waterworkshops. So the two we're going to be focusing for answering questions on today are going to be the plants for the Arizona desert and the hummingbird and butterfly presentation, where we talk specifically about those plants that do attract those wonderful hummingbirds and butterflies. So go ahead and whatever questions you have, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box that you should see on your screen, and we'll go ahead and get rolling. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment and share a different one so we can talk about, there we go. So we can talk about some of the different resources you have out there. And one of the great resources we have out there is, oops, I still have that tab up on Chrome. Okay, are you seeing? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so what we're looking at here today is a great resource for you. It is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association website. Gilbert is one of the members of this group. This is how we work collaboratively with all the other municipality water conservation partners out there. So we can work regionally and give you all sorts of great information. And one of the great things we have out there is this wonderful website, and we've got a great resource for looking at different plants up here. So that's going to be at amwa.org/plants. So you can just go into generic categories like looking at your trees, if that's what you have an interest in trying to find. So we've got all sorts of wonderful different species of trees up there, all desert adapted. And we give you great information. It's not just about pretty pictures and things like that. So once this loads up here, we do have nice pictures. That is the ironwood tree. So you can see you got great information here where we're seeing it is a tree. It likes full sun. It is frost hardiness down to 20 degrees. And I know it's kind of hard to think about that, but we do have to remember that sometimes some winters we do get down into those freezing temperatures. So especially if you're in the far outlying areas away from the urban heat island, you're actually going to get colder than what you see on the weather reports on the TV stations because they're reporting what you're seeing at the airports there. So we talk about the water use. We talk about where it's native to, definite growth rate. Now they say on the ironwood it is a slow growing tree, but actually with reasonably moderate irrigation, not excessive watering, it actually does grow at a more moderate rate than what we've previously thought. And these next 2 points are the real important ones out there. And let me get my little annotate thing up here. There we go. And you always want to make sure you're paying attention to the mature size that any plant you're going to be looking at planting will get. That's where we really stress right plant, right place. If you've got a little area that's only 2 feet wide next to your walkway, make sure you're checking that the plant you want to put there doesn't want to get 6 feet wide, because if you do put that plant there, you're just going to be constantly fighting the plant to keep it off the walkway. You're going to be mad at the plant, and the plant didn't put itself there, you did. So we'll also give you information about flowers, the foliage, and we also talk about some different comments over here. So we'll let you know if it's got anything with allergy problems. We'll let you know if it is kind of thorny, and you do want to pay attention to that if it's something you're going to plant next to a walkway. People are, especially with pool areas, are concerned about any kind of litter issues. You don't want to put any high litter plants or trees near your pool because you're going to be constantly cleaning out that pool. We do talk about wildlife, and in this case, we don't have any check boxes there, but on many of the other plants we do. So let's back this up a little bit here. And there we're still looking at trees. So now here we're on the main site. So we can do some very specific searches too if you're looking for specific things. So we can do plants with a purpose. So if you do have a pool, we've got some great listings of good plants that have lower litter issues. And this comes into the advanced search function. So we can look if we want a shrub that we want to plant next to our pool. And if we want to make sure it only gets 0 to 3 feet wide, and we want it to be low to moderate, let's say those 2 things in there, and you can select multiple things. And if we want it in full sun, And let's leave the other ones off for right now, and let's go ahead and do a search and see what comes up. Oops, 0 matches. I put way too much criteria in there. So let's go ahead and just do a shrub, and let's see what other kind of shrubs come up that we do like. There's shrub. Everything else says none selected. Let's try that search again. Nope. Let's go back to plants for the Arizona desert. Let's go to the main sheet again. And now let's do our advanced search here. So let's talk about shrubs. And let's say we do want a shrub that attracts hummingbirds. So we won't bother with any of the other criteria right now, just to see what kind of comes up. So we hit the search and we got 16 matches that came up. And these are all going to be plants that are great for attracting hummingbirds. So one of the great ones here, this is a nice plant that attracts hummingbirds, is the tuberosa. Tuberosa is actually Spanish for hummingbird, so that is a well-named plant for attracting hummingbirds out there. And we got some other great options down here. And I picked shrub. If I would have picked perennial, I would have also picked up some of the penstemons that do really well. And here's our flame honeysuckle, which I believe is Anisacanthus. Yep. So we've got great information for you here. It's really frost hardy all the way down to 5 degrees. It'll tolerate sun. And it's going to get about 3 feet high, but about 4 feet wide. So again, pay real good attention to that and make sure you're putting it in a place where it's going to be able to grow. Plant it at least 2 feet away from any walls so it won't be smashed up against the wall. And definitely make sure you're not putting it where it's going to start pouring over onto sidewalks and getting in your way when you're trying to do any kind of walking around. So here we do have some criteria where it is showing some great selections for wildlife there. So in this case, it also attracts butterflies, hummingbirds, and then just in general. So it's a great flowering shrub, and it flowers summer into fall. Those nice red, orange, tubular flowers that does attract the hummingbirds out there. So do we have any questions yet, Andrew?
None at the moment.
Okay. Well, that's what we're here for. So definitely ask any questions. That's why we put the videos online so you could watch them at your leisure. And I know some of them are like 40 minutes long. Kind of hard to sit through a 40-minute video on something like this. But the reason why we do that is so you can watch it parts at a time if you feel that way. So you can watch some of it and then go back to it later. So that's where we actually do have the full presentations going on. So this isn't meant to be a live presentation of the different slides of all the shrubs. That's in the video that we have on our website. We're here today to ask any questions you have, because that's one problem with just recording a video of the presentation itself and putting it online is people don't have the opportunity to ask questions. And unfortunately, with the coronavirus, we just weren't able to do our workshops for this season live, where we normally do them over at the Southeast Regional Library on Greenfield and Guadalupe Roads. We want to make sure we keep everyone safe. So we had to kind of experiment with this new process, and it's a learning experience for us all.
Okay, we do have a question.
Okay.
Is there any other criteria on the plant placement, such as don't put plant A near plant B because plant B will kill or compete with plant A, in relation to different chemicals that they might interact with in the soil, or maybe even just root competition?
Well, one of the things you do want to talk about, that's a great question, is some people do have some theories on a few different species out there where they have what they call phytotoxicity. And that means they are exuding chemicals out into the soil through their roots that make it so other plants don't want to grow around the area. And people have told me through the years that creosote is one of those bushes. And I'm not sure that's an issue of just phytotoxicity, or if you go out into the native desert itself and look where there's wide open areas filled with nothing but creosote, those are some of the worst growing conditions in the planet. And it may be just the fact that those creosotes are truly the only species that will survive that. Now, when it comes to root competition, that can be issues. And typically where we'll see that is where you've got trees and then you've got some lawn area. So you've got your emitters for your trees there, but don't forget, if you're doing a good job on growing those roots from when that tree is young, getting it matured and growing those roots nice and deep and wide, it will get roots out into the lawn area, and you will have some competition for the water you're applying to the grass is also being absorbed by those trees as well. So the biggest issue we see with trees and grass, though, is where the trees are providing too much shade. And our summer grass, our Bermuda species of grass that we typically use for our summer grass, want about 6 hours of sunlight a day. So if they're not getting that 6 hours of sunlight a day, it's going to get real thin under there, and pretty soon you're going to have just dirt. And it doesn't matter how much water you throw at it at that point. Without the sunlight, the Bermuda grass just isn't going to grow well. Now, the winter grasses we use, if you do put in a winter lawn, the perennial ryegrasses do well in the shade. So if you're not too interested in worried about having that summer grass out there, but you do want that nice winter lawn where people are typically more often outside, then just go ahead and put in your winter lawn, and then you'll have some good grass underneath those shade trees.
Good. Do you have anything to mention related to that on, like, for instance, pine trees and the pine needles what kind of plants might be affected by any change in soil?
Yeah, the pine trees can create some issues. They are going to take up water from everything, but the big thing with the pine needles is they have a very high acidity. So as long as you're not letting them build up in big thick layers where they're truly breaking down and actually changing the pH of the soil, that really shouldn't be a problem. So if you're just leaving them lay there and decompose on their own, then yes, that can cause a change in the pH of your soil, making it more acidic and harder for other plants to grow. Some plants really don't like acidic soils. Other plants don't like more base soils. Excellent questions.
So I don't have any other ones waiting, but one of the things that we run into quite a bit, if people who are joining us might have seen this around. I don't know if you have a word to talk about what's happened with the queen palms.
Ah, the queen palms. Yes, people have always had issues with queen palms. With our program that we have, our residential water efficiency checkup program, where a specialist will come out to your house. Usually people call us when they have a unusual and unexplained high water bill and they're not sure what's causing it. We can actually come to your house and help you find out what the problem is. But we get asked very often, what's going on with my queen palms? Well, the queen palms in general, they don't like our climate, they don't like our hot, dry summers, and they don't really like our soil. We've got a heavier clay soil here. Queen palms are a really fantastic species and really thrive in places like San Diego. So there's always been queen palms that were kind of on the edge and just kind of looked a little bit ratty. But what we're seeing going on this year, seeing it with other species of trees too, some of those marginal species that weren't necessarily the best plant choice here, is before this last winter, we had 3 winters in a row with almost no winter rain. So a lot of times what's going on, especially with these higher water use trees like those Arizona ash trees and things like that, and some of your big pine trees, nobody really has enough drip emitters out there to truly water that tree. So the way those trees have been kind of limping along all these years is they're getting that nice big generous dump of winter rain, and that's been helping them carry through. So we had 3 years prior to this last winter. This last winter we did get a little bit of decent rain into February and March. It was a little bit late, but we finally did get some. But the 3 years prior to that, we had almost zero rainfall. So we didn't have that to help our trees and build up that moisture profile in that root zone for those trees to draw on later. Now, we did have some rain this last winter, but depending on where you were in town, you may have gotten only a 1/4 inch of rain through our monsoon, or you may have even gotten less than that. So we also had a record number of days over 110 degrees this summer. So between not having those 3 years of winter rain to try and keep that moisture level up in that soil, not where your emitters are, that those trees were relying on, and then that record-breaking heat. So we're seeing the ash trees, the queen palms, and some of your big pine trees that are on drip irrigation, they're starting to fail. If you drive by our own municipal buildings on the north side of the municipal building #1, where we've got that grass area that we have events and all those Arizona ash trees out there, they've been slowly showing some dieback for the last couple years. And just within this last part of this summer, they've really been failing a lot more. So I'm sure our parks people are planning ahead and thinking about what they're going to do for some replacements. And for where we want that nice shady area for those public events that we do, And if we still want them to drop their leaves in the winter, what we call a deciduous tree, a really great choice would be the Chinese pistache. So it's going to give you that nice, lusher looking, rounded crown tree, especially those of us just like me are from the Midwest. We think of that kind of a tree as the shape of a tree. Gives that nice dense shade. It is really, really drought tolerant. Actually, the University of Arizona did some experiments with tree water use where they watered several different species of trees out at their test site at the farm at Maricopa, and they watered them for about 3 years to get them well established, and then they cut the water off. So they did that with some of our desert adapted trees, our true native desert trees with our native mesquites and some of the higher water use trees. And they cut off the water on January 1 of that year. And we went out and visited the site in August, and those Chinese pistache trees still looked great. They actually looked better than some of the mesquites, which was very, very surprising. So very, very hardy trees, much more hardy than we even thought they were.
You want to show a picture of that one on the website?
Sure, let's look at a Chinese pistache here. I'm sure we got some great photos of it. Let's do a search. And let's do Chinese. Did I spell that right? Let's see. Pistache. Let's say search. One match. There we go. Okay, so it is a tree. Now, one thing to remember about this Chinese pistache is remember, right plant, right place is look at how big this thing gets. Do not plant this in between you and your neighbor's house. If you have those smaller lots where you only have 20 feet between you and your neighbor, because you're not going to be very happy because that tree is going to start smacking into your house. So make sure you've got enough room to grow it, but it does have that nice rounded crown form. It does have flowers, but they're really not noticeable. They're kind of non-showy is what we call that. It does happen in the spring. Now, the one great thing about the Chinese pistaches, that's one of the trees that we actually get some nice fall color out of. So they can be anywhere from kind of a light yellow into those nice deep reds. If you're really looking to make sure you're getting one of the Chinese pistache trees that turns that bright red color, that will vary individual tree by individual tree. So your best bet on if that's really what you're after is getting a tree that does have that beautiful red color is go to the nursery when they're in color in the fall season. So you'll be able to see what they look like, and that way you won't get one if you want red and this one just happens to turn more of a yellow, you'll get what you want. So let's look at some nice flowers here. So we do have some nice green, lush looking leaves. So some people out there really don't like some of the smaller leaves that we have with some of our desert trees, although that is one of their adaptations to be lower water use, is they've got much smaller leaves so they don't transpire as much water. And let's see, where do I go to the next photo? I thought I had a sideways arrow key here. That's okay. So here we go. Here's one of the grouping of the trees in colors. And here you can see that individual variation I'm talking about, where you've got one tree turning a little bit more red and other trees turning a little bit more of that yellowish color. And let's see, let's find another one. There we go. There's a nice close-up of some of the leaves as they're beginning to turn in color. So again, if you're really looking for one that does have darker, more vibrant red, you want to pick it out at the nursery when it is doing that, and that's going to be your fall season.
Excellent. We have a question. Does Gilbert provide any services to help review landscaping and health of trees and shrubs in people's homes and their yard?
I'm sure that is one great thing about Gilbert is our 3 water conservation specialists are all very, very knowledgeable about landscape. And the reason that we are is because as much as 70% of your annual household water is actually ending up outside in the landscape. It depends on how big your yard is and how many people are in the house, but on average, 50 to 70% of your annual water use is actually ending up outdoors. So that's where we really focus on helping people with watering those plants properly. And actually, over the course of all the years I've been involved, my background is actually in landscape and irrigation. Out of all the years I've been involved in that industry, whether as a contractor or as a water conservation specialist, the majority of plants I see that have been that have died have been because of improper watering. And actually, especially with our desert adapted species, the majority of those plants have actually been killed by overwatering, not underwatering. So what happens is people start to see some of their desert looking shrubs looking a little bit sick, and the first thing we do is run to that timer and add more water to it. If it was already too much water that was the problem and you're just adding more water to it, you're just accelerating the death rate of that plant. And the plant nurseries really do appreciate your repeat business. They like it when you come back and buy more plants from them. But by setting up an appointment, you can do that either through the Gilbert 311 app or call us on our hotline at 480 503 6098 and select the option for the water efficiency checkup. We'll help you with your water use, and if you have questions about your individual plants in your landscape, we're more than happy to answer it because all of us are well versed in landscape and watering issues.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Any recommendations on landscape design software? Are there any that include information on Arizona native plants, such as those that we're seeing on the AMWA site?
You know, honestly, I haven't really reviewed any of the software packages that are out there for landscape design. I know there's some of those packages out there. As far as the plant palettes they have in them, I'm just not aware of it. But that's definitely something you can research when you're looking at the different products. You don't want to end up with a software package that is going to be talking about all the plants that grow up in the Northeast, because now you're not going to be able to actually put them in your yard. So I'm sorry, I honestly don't know the answer to that one.
No problem. Thank you. We've covered the questions at the moment. If we're while we're waiting for other ones, let's see. Oh, another question. How can I find a landscape designer and installer that is knowledgeable about xeriscape landscape?
Oh, good question. How to find a good contractor. Now, one thing you do have to remember is there is a difference between a landscape designer and a landscape architect. A landscape architect actually has to hold a degree in landscape architecture, and then they actually have to apprentice with a firm for a certain number of years before they get their actual landscape architect credentials. A landscape designer does not have any of those requirements. That's not to say they don't know what they're doing, but just be aware that they haven't had that formal authorized training and certification and the actual credentials of a landscape architect. When it comes to hiring a landscape designer or hiring anyone that's coming to your house doing any work, whether it's on your landscape or on your appliances or whatever it may be, definitely make sure you, excuse me, interview several of them. So that way you're getting a good feel for who's going to really work with you and who understands your concerns, who's able to answer your specific questions well. When it comes to hiring a landscape contractor, there are a lot of landscape contractors out there. And one of the ways you can make sure you're getting a good landscape contractor is look for people that have gone through some of the training that's available out there. The training that our water conservation offices are involved with is called Smartscape. So the normal basic Smartscape course is 10 separate classes that are 3 hours apiece, where we do talk about in one of the classes design. We do talk about desert adapted plants and plant selection and maintenance. And we also talk about soils and pests and diseases and some irrigation, such as how to design and install a drip irrigation system, and then how to water and then how to properly program controllers. There's an add-on module to that course called Advanced Smartscape, which is 3 6-hour classes that are on nothing but irrigation. And we actually have a directory online where you can get contact information for the people that have gone through that training at smartscape.org. And let's see if I can pop that up here. Yeah, I can't get to my plus button on my tab for Chrome. So let's just do it here. Smartscape.org. Are you seeing that on your screen, Andrew? Excellent. So yeah, this tells you all about what the Smartscape program is. and you can actually go to our professional directory and you can search either verify a credential. If somebody tells you they've gone through our Smartscape training, you can search for them this way and make sure they truly did go through the training. Or you can search it to look for people who are actually saying they're for hire. We do have some options out here. Now, when you just go to this basic list, this is everybody who has gone through the Smartscape training all the way back since the mid 1990s, I believe, is when Smartscape actually started. So this has been around for a while. But if you want to look for certain criteria, you can look for people that are working in the East Valley, and we can look for people that are doing residential work. Now, anyone who's gone through the Smartscape training has their name up on this website and the contact information they gave us when they went through the training. We've been reaching out to them, asking them to update their information for things like what part of the valley do they work in? Do they do residential versus commercial? So I don't think too many people have done it yet, but I think some have. So we can just come down here and hit filter. And okay, it looks like we got a few names there. So this would be one way to look at some people. And if we click on someone's individual name, we can see what kind of work they do, some contact information, their service areas. Looks like these guys do both residential and commercial work. They do design, landscape consultation. So these people have gone through the standard Smartscape course and the advanced Smartscape course, which is specific to irrigation. And we also do like to put up there, we're not the only training out there. So we will talk about any different certifications or degrees that they may hold. So these people have gone through the Arizona Certified, or this person, I should say, has gone through the Arizona Certified Landscape Professional Program that is offered by the Arizona Landscape Contractors Association. That's a really great, rigorous course with a nice test at the end. They also are a member of the Arizona Society of Landscape Architects, and they've gone through the desert. Oops, I wrote right over that, didn't I? Not very good at drawing with the mouse. This person has also actually gone through the Desert Landscaper School, which is offered at the Desert Botanical Garden. So those are three real good training options out there, whether it's our Smartscape program, the Arizona Certified Landscape Professional Program through the Arizona Contractors Association, Landscape Contractors, or the Desert Landscape School at the Botanical Garden.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have another question pending, but one of the things that before we finish up that don't know if you wanted to touch on, you did touch on in the presentation a little bit with regards to butterflies and hummingbirds and maintenance practices.
Absolutely. So let's see if I can't, let me stop sharing this screen real quick. There we go. And let's pull up my PowerPoint for regular plants. And we'll get down to the maintenance section. And then I'll fire up that presentation again. And we can actually talk about some of the maintenance aspects because I do have some pictures here. Okay, so let's start that presentation, get that up on the screen, and let's go back to, this is where I got to go to the other screen to do my share again. Oh, wait a minute, maybe not. Put this down, there we go. So let's go back to share screen and screen 2. Is that looking right for you, Andrew? Okay, excellent. So yeah, taking care of your plants. So once you do get your nice, beautiful landscape put in, so when you first put it in, it looks a little sparse. So the plants are very, very small, but after it does begin to mature out there, when it comes to taking care of it and what you want to do there, when it comes to pruning, reasons to prune trees, dead branches, diseased branches, crossing branches that are rubbing against one another, those are your 3 main reasons on why you would prune a tree. So be cautious about some of these people out there that want to convince you that they need to completely hollow out all the foliage and branches out of the middle of your tree. And they'll tell you that because this will help the tree withstand our winds and the monsoon storms better. Actually, what they always end up doing when they do this is they lift up the tree so much, the top 2/3 of your tree should still have canopy on it. So that should still be with foliage on there. So when they do that, they're putting all the weight at the very ends of the branches up on top. So they're actually kind of making it more of a lever and actually making it easier for the wind to blow the trees down. So make sure when you are hiring somebody to do your tree work, that's another training out there that I didn't talk about yet, but good time to bring it up now, is use a certified arborist. So you can also search for those people through the International Society of Arboriculture's website. I know that's a mouthful, and I don't remember the actual website right off the top of my head, but we'll pop that up as soon as we go through some more of these slides. So that's pretty much why you do prune a tree. Now, when it comes to pruning shrubs, you want to control the form. You don't want some wild, out of control thing out there. But that doesn't mean going out there with the power head shears all the time, and we'll talk about that in a minute. A little bit to control size, but that doesn't mean if you're always pruning to keep it off a walkway, that means that's probably not the right plant for that place. So you may actually want to think about replacing it instead of constantly trimming it. So definitely what we want you to do is definitely take care of your plants and fairly neat and tidy, but we want you to do, or we recommend that you do, a more natural selective pruning rather than using those head shears. And we don't want you to abuse those plants. You know, don't insult them either. That poor cactus probably just ruined his self-esteem there. So when it comes to pruning trees, like I said, leave the top 2/3 of the tree in canopy. And as I showed in this picture we have in the presentation in the video, there was almost no leaves left on those poor trees. And they did it to every tree in the parking lot. And that summer, all of them died. There was just not enough foliage there for them to do what they need to do as a tree. So this is also another problem. And this is where we're talking about that problem with changing where that leverage point is. So when the wind comes by in this location, all the weight in the tree is up here. Now, if this tree were properly pruned and still had its canopy, top 2/3 of the tree in canopy, if you look at kind of a lever and where its tipping point is, what we call a fulcrum, that fulcrum would be here. But now because of what they've done with doing this, they've moved that fulcrum down here. So now it's much easier for the wind to blow that tree down. And that's exactly what happened. And this is at a commercial location, so that is definitely a liability for them. Those trees could have fallen on somebody or on somebody's car that they could have been liable for. So when we talk about pruning trees, we want to talk about where to cut. So what we talk about, and actually before we get there, oops, let me back up a little bit. Sorry about that. I thought I brought these up one at a time, but I'm going to bring my little drawing tool up here. What you're going to want to do is cut at the just outside of what we call the branch bark ridge and the branch collar, which is going to be right there on this tree. What you don't want to do is do a stub cut. So you've got that little stub hanging off there. Trees do not heal themselves. They do what's called compartmentalization. They seal themselves off from that open wound. And if you cut them out here and leave that stub, they cannot do that sealing job. So now you've got the potential for introduction of disease and or insect problems out there. You also don't want a flush cut down like this. So now all of a sudden the tree is not going to be able to wall itself off from the wound. So I'm going to get rid of my little drawings here, and then we're going to talk about pruning larger branches, which is what we show on the left-hand side of this slide here. This is a very large branch, so you don't want to just try and cut this in one cut down at the proper place that we showed you, because what's going to happen is when you get halfway through that cut, the weight of the branch is going to break the rest of the branch off, and you're going to end up peeling off a bunch of the bark down there. So what you're going to do is you're first going to take an undercut just outside of where you want your final cut to be. Now, try to get halfway through, but you usually can't do that because the weight of the branch will actually bind up your saw and you can't move it anymore. Then after that, you're going to come about 6 to 12 inches outside of that, and from the top side, do this overcut. And when you get about halfway through that tree, oops, I'm moving it. That's kind of interesting. It will break right there. But now because you've already done this undercut right here, it will not peel your bark down here. That allows you to do your final cut, and you don't have any weight left here that'll peel that bark down. Well, let's get to some shrub pruning here. Yeah, well, you do have some tough decisions out there. If you've got a tree that looks like this at your house, yeah, you've definitely got to figure out what to do about this because when these two trunks are growing together, they don't actually grow together. They grow into one another, but they're not literally attached in that point. So that what we have in that position is what we call included bark. Down inside that area is actually bark. Those two trunks are not attached. So when this tree was selected, you should have chosen one or the other and cut the other one off. And actually, in the case of this, I would not have selected that tree from the nursery to begin with. Okay, let's go. I think it's the next picture. So here's what you're going to see what happens as a result of that included bark. There just was no attachment down here. They got heavy enough and the tree split down the middle. And they probably didn't want to give it up right away because they like the tree. But now, since they didn't make that tough decision when that tree was young, now they have no tree whatsoever and they're starting over from scratch. So when it comes to pruning shrubs, high maintenance shearing, that weird, strange cookie cutter shape that we do to our shrubs out there increases the water needs of the plants. The leaves are transpiring water. That's what they do after the photosynthetic process. And, we perspire, plants transpire. So they're releasing much of the water they bring up as water vapor through their leaves. Oops. And when we shear them, remember the leaves are the food making part of the plant through that photosynthetic process. And when you shear them, you remove the plant's ability to make food. So that plant will respond by going into an accelerated growth mode to grow itself back out of the damage that we just created. And that increases the water use. That also means the plant is growing faster, which means we shear it even more. So that is not good for the plants. So it stimulates that succulent growth. You got lots of open wounds there. And you're also going to take away that shade from the stem, trunk, and roots. And it is slow motion starvation of plants. Some plants do tolerate it better than others, but definitely let them show their stuff. That's a shrub, and that may be a little bit too wild and crazy for some people. But just with your regular hand pruners, with just about 4 or 5 snips, you should keep that plant into a fairly basic round form again. But you've got all those flowers on there. That is the flowers of that emu bush. That is a great hummingbird and butterfly attracting plant. That's also a plant, one of the common varieties of that is called Valentine bush. That is because it blooms around Valentine's Day. So finding stuff that blooms in the wintertime here is a little bit of a challenge, and that is a great selection for it. Also think about the timing. So here we've got some bougainvilleas where they've got a nice hedgerow there. It's a nice flower there, provides that nice color. That is the other side of the very same property. So the landscapers had done their maintenance on one side of the property that day. They just didn't finish up the other side. They came back the next day and took all the flowers off of that side. So out of this or this, I think that looks a lot more attractive with the flowers on there. So sharing it makes a lot of waste. That's stuff that needs to be taken out. Luckily for our Gilbert residents, we do have our bulk trash pickup. So hopefully we're putting out all that green waste out to be composted so it can be reused. So definitely use those pruning shears. Here's something that we did in the presentation where this petite oleander is starting to get a little wild and crazy. It's got those branches springing out all over the place. So rather than taking your head shears to it and turning it into some strange shape like a cupcake or a gumdrop with just a few clips there, we've gotten that plant back into a nice shape. We still have the flowers, and it actually makes your job quicker because now you don't have all that little bitty litter to pick up that happens when you're using those head shears with all those tiny little pieces of debris you create. We've just got some big branches there that are very easy and very quick to get out of the way. And there you see the plant, and guess what? It still has flowers. It's kind of odd that we do this weird shearing to our plants because most people will pick one plant over another because they like the flowers more. And then they bring their plants home, they get to a certain size, and then they just start shearing them and they never see any flowers on them anymore. And if you're trying to attract hummingbirds and butterflies, it's not the plant that attracts them, it's the flowers. There we got a couple other plants coming up. This is a Baja Ruellia, so generally speaking, many of your shrubs left to their own devices will grow in a fairly round form. So that was nice and round. This one is not. And also when we're looking at this plant, pay attention to what's happening on the inside here. See how thin and sparse that is? You really only have foliage at this point on the very outside shell of that plant. There's nothing on the inside going on there. So that's becoming real thin and sparse in there. And then if you do have any dieback on there, you're going to have a problem that looks something like this. Oh, there's a great one. Now, I'm sure those landscapers are very proud of themselves about just how neat and uniform and tidy they've got their shapes on there. There just happens to be one poor problem with that. Those are not shrubs. Those used to be mastic trees. They are not trees anymore. Well, there's some interesting shapes out there. The landscape architect that probably designed this wanted all those plants to grow together. So when they were in bloom, it would be just one mass of color on the corner of that intersection. But for some reason, people think individual plants have to stand all by themselves and they're not allowed to touch each other. Plants are allowed to touch each other. They're not going to give each other coronavirus. So there's some more fire plugs out there, and you'll see that one has already given up the ghost and it is dead.
Yeah, real quick, we have a kind of related question.
Absolutely.
Comment / question. Where I grew up in San Pedro River Valley, native mesquite trees grew naturally with multiple trunks, and they did not appear to be crossing or rubbing together from the ground level. Is that better for mesquite trees, or is a single trunk selection better for those?
I think that comes down to personal preference. It's just that if you are going to do a multi-trunk mesquite, make sure it doesn't have those tight V-shaped, what we call the crotch. For lack of a better word, that's what we call it. But basically what you're going to want is more of a U-shaped join between those multi-trunks. That way you're not going to have that included bark problem, and they do really, really well. I happen to like the look and form of a multi-trunk mesquite tree, but make sure they don't have those real tight growing almost vertically together branching structure, because you are going to get that included bark problem and you're going to lose one or the other. If you let it go too long and it finally splits down the middle, you've lost the entire tree. Okay. So yeah, this is what happens when I showed you that one plant where it's got all that shearing going on and there is absolutely no foliage on the inside. And if you have one branch die out, now we have the shape of this plant. And what I call the shape of this plant is the Arizona igloo. I got a couple other kind of neat photos of here, some plant prunings. You know, you got to hand it to it. Whoever does this is very talented on being able to make that shape. But he definitely is increasing the water requirements of that tree. And towards the end here, this is actually locally in the valley. I think that other picture was from Southern California. But again, you got to really give the guy credit for having the talent to make these shapes. But sooner or later, if he does have a branch die back, he's going to have a big hole in one of his quail, unfortunately. And you know, this tight shearing and this manicured look of the plants that's so prevalent here in the valley, we often refer to this as the Disneyland effect, because they do these very shaped topiaries at Disneyland. What most people don't realize is Disneyland has their own on-site nursery in the back lots there, and they have full-size plants ready to pop back in and replace any where they've got that branch die back, and now they've got a big gaping hole in their beautiful topiary. Disneyland is not going to tolerate that, so that very night, that plant's coming out of the ground and its full-size replacement is going right back in and then sheared to match up the shape of the rest of the form that it's in. So they do that, and they also understand of what will happen when they're doing that. So they've got full-size replacement plants ready to go. Any more questions?
That's it on the questions at the moment, and I do have the link to the arborist website if you want to pull that up.
Sure. Let me stop sharing my screen here. And we come back over here. Okay. What is the ISA website?
Go to isa-arbor.com.
So yes, this is the International Society of Arboriculture. Oops, I got to share it here. First of all, let me go back to my PowerPoint and escape on that. There we go. So now let's go to my share screen, which also is all the way over here again, I think. Oh, where'd my share screen go? There we go. So let's share Google Chrome. There we go. Okay. This guy out of the way here. So yeah, this is the International Society of Arboriculture's website. So you can learn all sorts of things. They've got great information on here as far as earning your credentials if you want to become an arborist, becoming a member. They've got some great publications out there. And you can also do things where you can find an arborist. So it's been a while since I've done a search on this website. So we can find an arborist. You can also verify a credential here. Let's find an arborist. And you can search. This is where you can verify credentials and be very careful. Again, if somebody comes to your home and they do some maintenance on your shrubs and they shear them into those terrible, horrible shapes and cut all your flowers off, many plants will tolerate what we call a reduction pruning, where you prune them back real hard to where you just have the sticks coming out and then they regrow into a more natural form again. But if somebody comes and butchers your trees, like in some of those examples we showed earlier, there's no recovering for that. That is replacing of the tree. It's the only way to get that tree back. And while you can replace a tree in a day, if it was a 20-year-old tree, to truly replace a 20-year-old tree, it takes 20 years. So make sure you're hiring good people that know what they're doing. And a lot of those people will say, yes, I am a certified arborist. And I think they do it by USA on this one. United States, there we go. And now we can select by Arizona. And then we can search by Gilbert. And let's do a search. So here you go. These are all the certified arborists, and they will actually list all their other different qualifications, such as on this one. Let me get my little drawing tool out here. So this guy is a certified arborist. This guy is a certified arborist. He's also got the municipal specialist going on, and he also has the ISA risk assessment qualification. So if you've got something going on with a tree and you're worried about, oh my gosh, this tree is big, and I've got these branches hanging over my house, is this a problem? Is this something I should be worried about? That would be a great person to bring out there, somebody with that particular qualification. So yeah, be careful. A lot of these guys, they know what the word arborist means, and they will tell you they are an arborist. Come up to the ISA website and verify that they actually are an arborist. Any more questions?
Let me check here. Have any other ones? We are getting close to wrapping up, so if anybody does have any other questions, feel free to please enter them into the chat or the Q&A. See any at the moment.
Okay.
This has been recorded and will be posted on YouTube as well.
Yep. So if you want to come back and review it and remember what answers to the questions I gave, you don't have to worry about scribbling everything down as fast as you can. We are going to put it up on our workshop website just the same as the workshop videos are. Okay,
we have one more question come in. How do you take care of hibiscus?
Hibiscus. Well, hibiscus are a high water use plant, and that doesn't mean they're bad. We definitely don't say don't plant any high water use plants. We know people do love their high water use plants, whether they're roses or hibiscus. One thing about the hibiscus is make sure you choose its location carefully. And kind of like roses, definitely give them, they need sun to flower well. But if you plant them in a place where they're going to get afternoon shade, they're going to tolerate our hot, dry seasons a lot better. But as far as maintaining them, pretty much just kind of let it go. But if it starts getting too big to the area, that's where we're going to do what we call that reduction pruning. And I'm sorry, I don't have any photos of that, but it's a little bit scary to people who have never seen it before. This coming spring, I am going to be doing a reduction pruning to one of my bougainvilleas out in my front yard because it is now getting too big for the area. And I don't want to be head shearing it into any kind of square or round kind of shapes. I want it to have flowers on it. So right now it's about as tall as I am and it's about 8 feet wide. It's getting out into my driveway now. So even that size plant, what I'm going to do is when I cut it back, I'm going to cut it all the way back to those main trunks to only about 1 foot off the ground. So when I get done with that, it is literally going to be just a couple of big old trunks coming out of the ground. It's a 25-year-old bougainvillea, so it's almost like tree trunk size down there. And when you do that, everyone's like, oh my gosh, you killed your plant. If you do that on about February 14th or so, that's typically our safe frost-free date. But you don't want to do that in the middle of June. That's not a good time to do that type of pruning. But within just a few weeks, it's already sprouting that new nice growth there. So the hibiscus on its own does a really good job of growing in a pretty round shape all on its own. So maybe just if it's getting a little too big for an area, right around that frost-free date of February 14th, cut it back nice and hard. Make sure you're cutting it back far enough that when it does come back with its new growth, it will fit in the area that you're after. It is a free flowering plant, which means it's not like roses where you have to go out and deadhead them or cut the dead flowers off. It automatically drops the flowers when they're expired, so you don't have to worry about doing that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. The follow-up is just confirming afternoon shade or afternoon sun for the hibiscus.
Afternoon shade, morning sun, afternoon shade, and that's also a good location for your rose bushes as well.
Excellent. We did have another question come in that time about when should a young, newly planted tree first be pruned?
Pruning new trees. Hopefully you've put it in a place where you don't need to do any pruning whatsoever for at least the first year, unless you've got those crossing rubbing branches. Some of those branches, sometimes they're traveling inwards into the tree and rubbing against other branches. And when they do that, they're going to rub off the bark, which is the protection of the tree. That's the skin of the tree. So definitely try and keep those lower branches as long as you can. We've got some new trees that were just planted not too long ago, right out by a sidewalk on the east side of our municipal building here on Civic Center Drive. And one of the things that we did to make sure we've got some good trunk development on the tree is those very low branches, maybe just only 6 to 12 inches off the ground. We left those on as long as we could because there's a growth hormone in the trees called auxin. And it goes up through the trunk of the tree and it goes into the places where the leaves are. So if you leave those lower branches on, you're going to get that growth hormone of auxin in there and develop a much thicker trunk on your tree. So if some of those real low branches are kind of getting in the way and maybe next to a sidewalk or something, we talked about trimming back to that branch bark ridge and bark collar. What you can do is some temporary cuts on those where you just kind of snip them back, purposely leaving stubs out there that still have leaves on them to make sure you're getting that auxin into that area for good trunk development. It'll make for a much better, stronger tree. Good questions.
Right. That is all of the questions. We're coming up near the end of our time here. So if you have any other last questions, go ahead and enter them, and I'm going to put into the chat our link to our water workshops. If you'd like to attend our next Q&A next Thursday, then go ahead and sign up for that if you have not already.
Yep. Here's that link that Andrew's putting in there for you. So if you haven't seen them, these are where the videos are. And the other videos that we are going to be talking about next week for next Thursday for our Q&A session is going to be focused on our presentation on how to water. And then once you know how to properly water those plants, like I said, very few people know how to water those plants and they just overdo it. And they actually, unfortunately, kill their plants with kindness. Once you know that, then you're going to want to know how to program those irrigation controllers. So we got a great video on that, and we'll be answering any questions on that. I know a lot of people are scared of those irrigation timers. No reason to be scared of those timers. They are not as hard as you think they are.
All right. No more questions that I'm seeing coming in. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and hopefully we will see you or hear from you next week as well.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up, and I hope we were able to answer your questions. If you do have other questions, feel free to email us at water.conservation@gilbertaz.gov.